Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Tom Shorter, and I proudly serve as the National Board Treasurer of the National Association of Latino Healthcare Executives. For those of you joining this evening for the first time, NALHE is dedicated to advancing Latino leadership in healthcare through mentorship, through professional development, advocacy, and community, because healthcare leadership must reflect the communities that we all serve. My own personal journey with NALHE began through my work with the American College of Healthcare Executives. As part of that work, I wanted to support the diversity in our community of healthcare executives. And let me name something. I am an ally in this work. I am not the face of the struggle. I am not Latino, but I have chosen to show up, to lend my voice and use whatever influence I have in service to this mission. And what I've found is that allyship is not a sacrifice. It's a privilege. It has made me a better leader, a better colleague, a better lawyer, and most importantly, a better person. What drew me to NALHE was not just its mission, but its people. I found a community of healthcare leaders who understand that leadership is not about individual success. It is about reaching back, opening doors, and creating pathways for those who come after us. And I've found something equally important, a space where advocacy is active, intentional, and deeply valued. I've learned that progress happens when we choose to listen, to support one another, and to grow together, not despite our differences, but because of them. Inclusive leadership does not just benefit Latino executives, it benefits our teams, our organizations, and ultimately the patients and the communities that are counting on us and that we all serve. This is why tonight's conversation matters. This is why your presence at this session this evening matters. It is now my honor to introduce our host, someone who embodies this spirit of leadership and service. Please welcome Dave Ortiz.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you for sharing your story, and also thank you for your support in NALHE. Hi, everyone. Dave Ortiz, and welcome to Rama. In this interview series, I get to sit down with accomplished Latino healthcare professionals to explore their journeys, to explore their challenges and their triumphs. Here's how Rama can guide aspiring Latino healthcare professionals. By branching out, just as branches extend from a tree, Rama aims to extend knowledge and inspiration and mentorship to early career Latino healthcare leaders. Each interview represents a unique branch, showcasing a diverse experiences, specialties, and perspectives within the healthcare field. It's also rooted in heritage. The series celebrates cultural heritage. Participants share how their backgrounds, traditions, and family values have influenced their paths. By embracing their roots, aspiring leaders can find strength and resilience in overcoming obstacles. It's also about mentorship and growth. Rama provides a platform for seasoned leaders to mentor and guide next generation through their experiences. Aspiring professionals learn from their wisdom and insights shared by successful Latino healthcare executives. It's also about community and inclusivity. Just as a healthy tree supports a thriving ecosystem, Rama fosters a sense of community. Participants discuss inclusivity, equity, and the importance of uplifting one another. And finally, it's about championing authenticity. Like leaves on a branch, each interviewee brings their unique story. Authenticity is celebrated here. Aspiring leaders are encouraged to stay true to themselves even as they navigate professional growth. Rama serves as a beacon, illuminating the path for aspiring Latino healthcare leaders through these interviews. They gain insights, build connections, and find inspiration to flourish in their careers. So I have the very distinct privilege of being able to introduce someone who I have been working very quietly behind the scenes in an effort to try to have him be here. It worked out perfectly. I asked once and he was available and everything worked out really well. I want to introduce to you everyone, Noel J. Cárdenas. For episode number 5 of Rama, I have the honor of that's a new thing. I have the honor of welcoming a true leader in our field. Noel J. Cárdenas, MHA and FACHE Noel serves as a Senior Vice President and Chief Executive Officer for Memorial Hermann Southeast and Memorial Hermann Pearland hospitals in the Houston area, where he leads high-performing teams serving one of the nation's most dynamic and diverse regions. Noel is also the current chair of the American College of Healthcare Executives. After years of service as a governor, as a regent, and chapter president, reflecting his deep commitment to advancing healthcare leadership, mentorship, and excellence across the country. His career has been recognized with multiple ACHE honors, and he continues to invest in community and economic development through board roles with organizations such as the Pearland Chamber of Commerce, the Bay Area Houston Economic Partnership, and Texas A&M School of Public Health. Beyond titles and awards, though, Noel is known for his passion for building strong teams, aligning strategy with purpose, and truly knowing the people he leads. These are the values that resonate deeply with the conversations that we are about to have in La Rama. Noel, welcome to La Rama. It's a privilege to have you here.
Thank you, Dave. It's truly an honor to be with you today and to be able to spend some time, doing some question and answering and just getting to know more about me and where I came from and how I've gotten to the role where I'm at today with Memorial Hermann as well as with ACHE.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So Noel, just to recap, what we're going to do is a couple elements. We're going to start with a deep dive. We'll have a couple questions. We've got about maybe 25 minutes of that time, hopefully, and expecting to have viewers ask their own questions. And if time permits, we want to be able to have them have their voice and be able to ask you questions directly. And then finally, one of my favorite sections is the rapid fire, when we go through just a handful of questions with one-word answers or 1 to 2 word answers. And then finally, we'll conclude with the final words and thoughts. All right. So I'm going to jump right into just a quick milestone. I just want to congratulate you in your recent installation for the ACHE 26-27 chair. You're leading a global society with over 50,000 plus healthcare executives. That must be a special opportunity for you.
Yeah, it's, for me, it's like a pinnacle of my career, when you think about to be able to serve in this role. And, the other part of it too is being the second Latino to actually serve as chair, the first being Rich Cordova, who's one of the founding leaders of NALHE, and to follow in his footsteps years later and to serve as chair, it's just been, it's been a humbling experience. And truly an honor as I have jumped into the role here just over a month ago. And looking forward to the next year as I get to, get out, visit with chapters and obviously lead the board over the next year.
That's fantastic. I sat with during your keynote at my first NALHE summit, and I one of the things that resonated is like you highlighted a 30-year Army career. You retired as a colonel, and now you're a leader at Memorial Hermann. I just can't imagine that being an easy transition. You retired in 2015 and you moved directly into civilian COO role at Memorial Hermann. What was the biggest culture shock moving from that command-based leadership to bottom line revenue-driven healthcare?
Yeah, it was very different. I mean, for one, it wasn't an easy transition, but I will tell you, people made it easier for me. There wasn't anybody I couldn't reach out to that could, that offered their assistance. I will tell you, culturally, very different, right? I came from a healthcare system, military medicine, where we were budget based, right? We got a certain amount of dollars every year. My last role, I was commanding and serving as the CEO of a military hospital at Fort Sill. So I had an established budget that I had those 2 years when I was in that role. And my role was to take care of a set population. So in this case, it was about 50,000 people that we were responsible for caring for that lived in and around the community. It wasn't just soldiers, it was their family members. And so when you have to approach healthcare in that way, that it was more along the lines of population health. My role was to keep them healthy, especially the soldiers, right? And keeping them in a ready state, as well as keeping their families healthy so that the soldiers could perform. When I transitioned to the private sector, it was obviously a big adjustment. I will tell you, one of those adjustments right off the bat was getting used to people calling me by my first name. You think in the military, it was always Colonel and my last name. rarely was there ever, if there was ever a conversation where somebody called me by my first name, it was usually a senior officer, senior to me, that would, and it was usually more so in a private conversation, because you kind of kept it very professional and very structured in the military. So first of all, just getting used to people, even when I showed up for the interview, prior to me being hired, and people were addressing me as Noel, it was kind of an adjustment. So, but it was an easy adjustment, I will say, because it made me feel part of the team right away. And even to this day, it's it's been part of the past. But as I transitioned, the other part of it definitely was the fact of leading a civilian healthcare organization as a chief operating officer. And I took a step back. If you think of the role I was in, here was leading a hospital in the military, then transitioning to a chief operating officer. But it was probably the best decision I ever made, because it allowed me to learn the differences, right, between the two systems. My boss, I remember the first thing he told me when I went into the role, he said, the first thing I want you to do is spend about 90 days doing relationship building, learning to get to know the physicians, get to know the staff, get your ground, get yourself footed. And then after that, it was deep into discussions. And around the time I joined, they were developing their strategic plan. And so that was new to me as well, because the strategic plan was very different than what we had done in the military. And so to learn that, it was different. But as you talk about the revenue-driven healthcare, right, that's what was really different, in that now you had to build business. You had to go out and find it. You had to recruit and bring physicians in. Whereas in the military, they were part of the organization. So it was just really having them do the day-to-day. So getting out there, finding that business, bringing those physicians in. The other part of it was understanding a service line operating model, which was, operating under, looking at orthopedics, looking at surgery, looking at women's services. That was very different as well. So as I started to gain that traction in there, it was really the people within Memorial Hermann that took the time to sit down with me and understand. I will tell you the other thing that was very different for me was when I remember prior to me going into the role, I sat down with my boss at lunch, and he showed me the org structure of the hospital. And quickly I noticed, I'm like, okay, I noticed you have the perioperative areas underneath me and the endoscopy and cath lab. I said, I've never had clinical functions underneath me, because when I was serving as a chief operating officer in the military, and then even as the CO, right? As a CO, yes, obviously all those clinical functions were next, but I never had direct responsibility over them. This was the first for me. And he said, well, this is how we do it in Memorial Hermann. We want our chief operating officers to understand some of the clinical functions and to be able to lead those, especially those that they put underneath you, which is the perioperative areas, because that's what generated revenue, right, for the hospital. Those are the money-making areas, which are our procedure areas. And so sitting down, understanding that, and, again, leading that area. But I still remember sitting down with the director of that department, and Beth Martinez, and I said, Beth, I said, the first thing I want to let you know is I've never led a clinical function. I said, but the other part of it too is, because I've never led that, I need to learn, and I need to grow, and I need you to teach me, right? So that if I'm ever in meetings, obviously I need to know, and she said, don't worry about it, I'll help you. And she took the time to kind of walk me through, how the perioperative area worked, how, all the things that went into that and the processes. And so again, that part of me grew very quickly. So again, going back to that, it was really giving, people taking the opportunity to teach me. The other part of it is being open to that, right? There's a lot of people that would just trying to drive through that and not take the time to learn. But one of the things that I've always felt was important as a leader is take the time to learn and grow into your roles. And over time, you'll get better and better, and you'll be able to lead that part of the organization. And it also develops a real culture of respect, right? I think she had a lot of respect for me, and that I opened up to her and shared that, right? And that's vulnerability, right? And as a leader, you've got to at some point make yourself vulnerable and make people aware, because the last thing you don't want to do is ever come across as you know it all, but you really don't. Yeah. And so, but the business side of healthcare was very different. I'll use one example. I had to learn all about length of stay, right? And, it's important to all of us, right? In the military, it was important. I will say length of stay. But again, keep in mind, if a soldier or a family member had to stay a couple of extra days in the hospital for whatever reasons, we just kept them in the hospital. you think on the private sector side, you know, if you're not discharging that patient in a timely fashion, that's a bed that's being held
Right.
and you're not getting another patient in it. And that's loss of revenue, right, for a hospital. So I had to quickly learn about the multidisciplinary rounding process, right, and understanding how we go through that process to get patients discharged and the discharge planning and so forth. So a lot of differences. It was a steep learning curve, but I took the time to learn and grow. And, you know, the other part of it too was at a certain point in that role, my boss said, okay, now you've learned everything about the hospital. Now we got to get you up to the system level so you can get and interact with system leaders so that you can then gain, you know, get that credibility and that reputation in the system.
Yeah. No, well, I love that story because I think you showed a lot of vulnerability, you know, crossing over, and you bared yourself open and you said, you know, I don't know this and I need your help. Will you help me? I think that to me just rang of character, you know?
Yeah. I mean, there were certain things I had down packed. I mean, when you looked at emergency management, I mean, I was an expert in it. I mean, we went through multiple floods, weather events. I could walk right into an emergency operations center and it was automatic for me. And people realized that there was a lot that I brought to the organization, but yet there was still a lot to learn in that role.
Yeah. You know, you once stated in the past, I think at one of the summit or another talk, I was able to hear you speak. You stated that character is one of the most important things for a leader. And you shared a great example there, but I wonder if you could dive a little bit deeper in terms of that. Like, what does character mean to you? And also, how did you overcome, you know, those tests? How was that? How did it shape you and how you lead today?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you character by far is probably the most important component of a leader, right? It's the one piece that you've got to make sure that you protect. You know, in the military, there was a big challenge in going between character versus competency, you know, and, you know, people feel like somebody's really, really extremely competent. I still remember working with some great leaders in the military and they were extremely competent in their role, but they had character flaws. And, you know, there was this thing of if I make the boss look good, he's going to forget about this little flaw I have with regards to my character. And I can tell you early in my career, I saw a lot of that where competency outweighed character. Towards the latter part of my career, it flipped the other direction. I think people were realizing that there were some challenges with character in the military. And so then they flipped it and became, the character must be number one. Your competency is number two. Now they work hand in hand, right? They do. I mean, you've got to be a competent and a very, you know, a leader with true character, but you've got to lead with a true north. You know, you've got to know where that direction and the direction you're going. You know, I always tell everybody, lead with a moral compass. You know that what you're doing is right. And, you know, I still recall back, you know, I had a great mentoring session with a 3-star general. And I shared that at ACHE Congress about my McDonald's moment. And one of the things he shared, other things, and we'll talk probably a little bit about that further in our discussion. But one of the things that he shared with me was about integrity. And he said, you've always got to be honest. And he said, and as a leader, people have to remember that as a leader, I tell everybody, I use this analogy all the time. You're like a goldfish in a bowl. All the eyes are on you. People are watching you, right? And they're seeing who you are and what you do and your actions. And people will, you know, take away from that and they'll see the type of person you are because they're observing you all the time. But he shared with me that if one person knows, everybody knows. And so that's what you have to keep in mind is that, if you tell a lie or you do something that's not ethically correct, somebody in that room knows, and it's not going to take long before it spreads and other people know. And so it's best to do the right thing all the time. And sometimes the right thing is not easy to do, but it is the right thing to do. And that's what you have to do as a leader. Now that was tested multiple times. I'll tell you one of those examples, and you know, this is probably the one that has hit me the hardest. And you know, it was in one of my commands when I was in a battalion command, and I had one of my leaders that was doing something unprofessional, and there was something that was done, and it came to my attention. I brought it up to, you know, senior leaders about it, because I thought there was this gut feeling, right, that something wasn't right. I escalated it, and I was told, we looked at it, there's nothing there, just let it go, right? There's nothing. But there was just something there that just didn't, it kept eating at me. So I confronted the individual straight up. I asked him, and they looked at me straight in the eyes and lied. But I trusted that person, right? I had worked with this person for many, many years. I thought I had a great relationship with this person, and I trusted him immensely. And I took him for his word, even though he looked at me. So months later, and I will tell you, there was talk about this, because I will tell you, even got back to my wife at one point, and one of my junior officers shared with her, well, I think your husband knew about it. And, you know, it bothered me because I didn't know, right? And I had asked the question.
Yeah.
But it bothered me so much when I found out the truth that I escalated it at that point. I didn't let it go. I brought it up to senior leaders well above me, and in this case, all the way up to the very, very top. And I said, if something's not done, I will do something. So there was action done, and but there are a lot of people that never knew about that. And, you know, and even to this day, right, it bothers me that, yeah, I probably should have done more. And because the other part of it too is it reflected on me. You know, I'm the highest leader in that organization, and yet I didn't do anything about it. So I always tell everybody, if it's something in your gut, don't let it go, right? If you really think there's something there, you know, investigate, check, do it, and make sure that it doesn't, you know, and at the end of the day, if you don't find anything, then there's nothing wrong with that, right? But at least you have to check. Now, it may fracture the relationship with that person. Yeah. And that's fine, because I'll tell you, a few years later, I had a kind of a similar situation come to me. Again, I escalated, checked into it. Nothing came of it, but it did damage the relationship between me and that person. But ultimately, I knew I did the right thing, and that I had to bring that up. So you're going to have times like that, right? As a leader, where you just got to make sure you do the right thing, and be truthful. But again, your character is very, very important. And, you know, I tell everybody, you don't ever want to lose that. So always maintain it.
I love the analogy that you're always in a fishbowl. And I think that there's so much to that, because people are looking to you, how you react in adversity, or, you know, if there's something that, you know, they're looking to get a cue from you. I had a conversation with somebody yesterday just about that, you know, and, you know, you could manage through panic, you can manage through fear, right? But you can't show that, especially if people are really leaning on, you know, how you're going to react through it, to get their energy or their strength to navigate through it as well.
Absolutely.
That was pretty powerful too.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears really quickly. I want to talk a little bit about, you know, the different communities that you operate in. Obviously, you're the president of ACHE. Obviously, you're active in NALHE. You're also active in the community you serve. You know, how would you characterize the importance of managing and being a servant to the communities around you in terms of your leadership? How does that impact you?
Well, as a leader, right, you got to be out there in the community you serve, right? You want to be visible. You know, running 2 hospitals, you know, I've got several communities. I tell everybody in my market alone, where my 2 hospitals, there are 16 chambers of commerce. Now, that doesn't mean I can be involved in all of them.
No.
Now, I've had to strategically kind of locate myself. So, like, for example, I'm on the Pearland Chamber of Commerce, because one of my hospitals, actually both my hospitals, anchor that community on the east and the west. The Bayhap one's very important, because it's that Bay Area part of Houston, and there's a lot of partners, and I get to interact with a lot of leaders. I'm also on the Brazoria Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. That's recently addition to a chamber that they've reached out to me, and I said, absolutely, I'd be more than happy to support and jump on the chamber. But, you know, being out there and more so, it's about connections, right? It's people knowing who you are, because, you know, being in healthcare, you know, you've got a lot of people out there that need care, right? And they're looking to, you know, who's out there present, who can I ask questions of, who can get the word out about some of the challenges that we're having in healthcare. I'm also reach out to a lot of different leaders in different levels, right? In the community, in the city, right? And, you know, mayors, I've got really good connections with several of the mayors, city councilmen, some of the state representatives as well, and then even some of the federal level, the congressional leaders. There's been times I've had a couple of them come to my hospital for a visit. I've had the mayor, come by. He visits, because I think it's important to stay connected with them, because the relationship works both ways. They need you, but you need them. Yeah. And, especially when you've got in situations of crisis, right? I still go back to the pandemic and, reaching out to those leaders and making sure that we were providing them what real looked like, right? What were we dealing with in our hospitals? What were our healthcare workers going through? The challenges we were having, what we needed from them to help us to make sure that we were doing everything we can to, one, serve the community, but also to protect them, right? Making sure that the information was shared properly about the vaccine and the availability of the vaccine. Right. Also kind of correcting that misinformation, right? I still remember one, it was a state leader, right? I was at an event with them and they said, I hear the numbers are down. And I'm like, actually, the numbers are worse. And so and I said, yeah, I'm not sure who's sharing that information with you, but let me tell you what's real. And here's the trends that we're seeing. So it's always important to be out there in the community, especially when you're, running two hospitals or whatever your role is in healthcare, right? It's important that you're out there serving the community any way you can.
Yeah, you serve such an important lens for them, to see what's happening, boots on the ground, and vice versa. You're a voice to the people that you serve, so that state leaders know exactly what really is important for the people that they are supposed to represent.
Yeah, so, another example, we've seen workplace violence, right? We're seeing nurses being, and what they're going through. And I still remember sitting with a federal, representative or a U.S. congressman and had him at the hospital. And I shared with him, I said, are you aware of the workplace violence? And he didn't quite understand. I said, I have nurses and even physicians and others that, they're slapped, kicked, punched. And he didn't quite understand that. And I said, does that really happen in a hospital? I said, absolutely. It happens every day. Right. So, even right now they're working on legislation, right, to make that a federal offense to assault a healthcare worker. We've got that for, people working at the airport, but we don't have that for people working in healthcare in hospitals. We need to have something to help protect our healthcare workers. Now, we also know that patients are challenged. There are situations where they don't know what they're doing, but it's those that know what they're doing and they, hurt our healthcare workers, and there needs to be accountability for that.
Wow. It's a definite necessity for us, and definitely a necessity for the healthcare workers. They should feel protected.
Yep, absolutely.
Wow. All right. Well, thank you for that. I think that was our deep dive for the section. And now we're going to turn it over and see if anybody's on and watching us and potentially may have some questions of their own. Lori, our lovely producer, is in the background. Is there anybody on or anybody who would like to submit a question for Noel? If not, we could always skip to the next section and we could jump into rapid fire questions if you want.
Sure.
So these are some of my questions I kind of pulled together. And, one of the first things I think most people kind of ask all the time is like, what are you currently reading? Like, what's the best leadership book? Or what's the current book you're reading now? It doesn't even have to be about leadership.
Well, most recently, I'll just tell you, I was listening on Admiral McCraven's latest book. I've read several of them, but he's got one that just came out. So I've actually about 3/4 of the way through it. I listened to Audible but I also take the time. Now that I've listened to it, I actually want to take the time to read the book. But I'll give you some examples of some books, and I actually have them here that I think every leader should have. This one right here, I'll just share this one. This is called Lincoln on Leadership. This is a book that I still remember being handed this book back in I'm trying to make sure I get the date right. It was with a mentoring session with a gentleman who's still a close friend to me. And I remember going to his office, and he shared this book with me and said, "This is a book you absolutely have to read as a young officer." So I've had this book, and I can tell you I have extra copies. I keep extra copies at my office. I keep extra copies here at home. But this is books that I give to mentees. I know I have one mentee right now that's reading it, and we had a mentoring session, and I asked him, how's it going with the book? And he said he was about halfway through it. It's actually a really easy read, but I can tell you, Lincoln is one of my heroes. Some people have asked, and I know this is rapid fire, but I gotta elaborate on this one. But for me, and why I respect Lincoln so much. First of all, he led our country through one of I would consider the most difficult times. Yeah. Right. And what we were going through as a country, and to be able to get us through that. But he's a leader that was always at the front. He visited soldiers on the battlefield. He would sit in the back of a room and listen. He did what's known as walk around management. Right. And so he talks about that in the book. I have also given this book to when I had soldiers that were struggling, when I was seeing that they were, had challenges with leadership. I'd tell them to read this book. I still remember my last assignment in the military, I gave this book to one of my majors, and I told him to go home and read it and come back and tell me where his opportunities were. He came back, to sit down with me, and I said, "So what'd you get from the book?" He goes, "Well, not really." I said, "Did you read the book?" And he goes, "Well, I skimmed it." I said, "No, go back and read the entire book and then come back and see me." And sure enough, he read the whole book, and he goes, "I know exactly what you're talking about and where my weaknesses are, so I'll work on those." So it's a great book. It's an easy read, and I encourage every leader to read it. It's called Lincoln on Leadership. It's by Donald Phillips. This is another favorite of mine. I actually made my kids read it. Make Your Bed. The Admiral McCraven has just some, what he talks about in this book. It's how you start your day, right? It's, your first day, you should set yourself up on a path to success. And it all starts on how you start your day from the time you wake up and all the way through your day. So that's another one. And this is another one that I've also enjoyed to read, which is Simon Sinek's book, right? Leaders Eat Last. And that is a true story. That is true for me. This philosophy about eating last. It is true in the military. And I still remember learning that as a young officer. Somebody, my non-commissioned officer that I worked with said, "We always eat last." And I said, "Okay, I can kind of understand that." He goes, "But do you understand why?" And I said, "I don't know. Tell me, Sergeant, why is that?" And he goes, "Because if there's not enough food, we're not going to be able to eat, right? But we make sure that our soldiers eat, right?" And so, funny story about that philosophy, which has stuck with me ever since. I always ate last when I was anytime around my soldiers. But when I was at the Northeast Hospital as the COO, we had a weather event. We were all in, and they brought food to the hospital, and people kept saying, "Go up and eat, go up and eat." And I was sitting in the back of the room, and somebody said, "Why aren't you eating?" I said, "When everybody eats, I will eat." And they said, "What do you mean by that?" And I said, "Leaders eat last." And so it's always stuck with me. And so rarely will you ever see me go through the line first when it comes to an event. I always sit back, especially if I'm in charge, right? I always, go up and eat food last. And a lot of it is just want to make sure your people are taken care of before you take care of yourself.
Yeah. That was a great answer. Definitely not rapid fire.
Yeah.
Definitely warranted, though.
I promise the next ones will be rapid.
No. Actually, we're going to double back because we got some questions from our audience. I'll start with, we've got 3 of them. So the first one is Felicia Colon. Thank you for joining. What are your thoughts with how the early or mid-careers healthcare leaders should handle the headwinds facing our industry in the upcoming years? Wow, that's a great question.
Yeah, that is a great question. So when you think about, how do early and mid-careers leaders, how do you handle those? I think the most important thing is make sure you're staying current on what's happening. Right? You've got to know what the environment's like. What are the challenges that we're having? And then what are we doing as leaders to make sure that we are educating ourselves to be able to handle that? The other part of it is continue to develop yourself as a leader to be able to handle those types of situations going forward. I know Felicia well. I see that she's on LinkedIn, but I know she's connected with you as well. Yeah. But how passionate I am about ACHE. ACHE can provide you all the resources and everything that you need from the education experiences as well as the networking to be able to help you as an early and mid careers to be able to handle these challenges that we're facing, right?
Yeah.
You know, I can tell you AI is going to be a challenge, right? How are we handling that? Well, ACHE has that as part of sessions where you can go in and listen in on those sessions to be able how we're going to be able to handle the AI and how it's going to change healthcare. And it really, for me, it's going to be how are we going to be able to do more for the communities we serve, because there's still so many that don't have access to healthcare. There's so many comorbidities out there. There's so many people that are really sick. How are we going to get ahead of improving the health of our communities in the coming years? Because we really got to do a better job of that. If not, the health conditions of the communities that we're serving is only going to get worse.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned ACHE. It's just such a treasure trove, and it's a strong community, you know. And NALHE, just like ACHE, you know, we have specifically concentrated programs for the early and mid careers. You know, you have La Mesa, and you have Ascender, and Raquel, my wife, is the developer of the Ascender program, so I'm kind of biased to it. But we've seen people go through 3 different cohorts, and we've just got our first person who went through the cohort, who's now going to be a CEO in the East Coast. So it's a huge platform.
What NALHE has done with this program is incredible, right? You're taking those early to mid careers where they really need that, and they need somebody to guide them. And by you putting that program together, you're really providing them with the things that they need to be able to be successful as they then become senior healthcare leaders.
Yeah, exactly. Shout out to all the cohorts.
Yeah, and it's amazing to see what NALHE's done. I mean, from where it started from, and, you know, and I remember being in that room when it was just a discussion.
Yeah.
And where NALHE is today.
It's ironic because it literally happened. It was sparked by a challenge made by NALHE's leadership, and it started at the summit where you were a keynote speaker. Yeah. So that summit was super powerful for many reasons, and that's another one. All right, so I have another question. This is a LinkedIn user. Any wisdom you can share on having a mentor versus a sponsor?
Yeah, there's definitely a difference between the two. Okay, and I'll share. You know, mentors can become sponsors at some point, and or you know, vice versa. You know, for me, you know, when I was transitioning from the military, you know, I had Rich Cordova, who became a mentor to me, right? He also became a sponsor, you know, because he then turned and introduced me to Chuck Stokes, who at the time was the chief operating officer of Memorial Hermann. And he made that connection for me and promoted me in a sponsor type role. Wow. Then Chuck became my mentor. And then as I was getting ready to hit that point when I was exiting the military, he then flipped from mentor to sponsor by passing my resume along to a leader within Memorial Hermann, which is how I ended up getting the interview. So the key is to understand, first of all, everybody needs to have a mentor or have mentors. I still, to this day, still have mentors. But there is a difference between the two, right? It's the mentor is somebody that helps you, right, as a leader and talking through things. The sponsor is somebody who can sit in a room and talk about you. And so they're the ones that can promote you and get you, you know, into that interview or get you into a role because of what they now know of you. So it's just so important to make sure. Now, you don't always, I would tell you, sponsors as opposed to mentors. Mentors, you seek them out. Mm-hmm. I've always found that sponsors happen over time, right? You don't seek out a sponsor. Now, if you have connections with somebody, like I've served as a sponsor where I've passed resumes along, but it's because I've had a past relationship with somebody, or I know of them, or I know of their, you know, how well they've done it in a role or their background, and I know they would be a good fit for a certain role. You know, that's where that connection on sponsor can happen. So, but you know, usually you don't go out saying, "Hey, will you be my sponsor?" Whereas you usually go to people and you say, "Can you be my mentor?" The sponsorship kind of happens just over time.
Thank you for that. Lori asks, what pieces of the iron were you able to sharpen with the Lincoln book on Lincoln leadership?
Yeah. So what pieces of the iron? So I will tell you what really I took away from that book was the walk around management, right? It was getting out there, being present as a leader. I will tell you that's probably the best thing you can do as a leader is to be present. I call some leaders, I used to call them outlook leaders, if you know what I mean by that. An outlook leader is the one that sits behind a computer and basically tries to drive and push people via emails.
Right.
Or you can be that leader that's out there present and knowing what's happening on the ground and people see you. And, it's kind of like a good example is, we ask people to round in a hospital. I ask my leaders to round in a hospital.
Right.
But if I don't do it myself, how is it that I can not know what's going on in an organization, right? So I do round. I round on staff and I round on patients. And it really does give me an idea of what's happening within my hospital, not only with my staff, but what's happening with our patients. It also helps me to validate that the things and the culture that I'm trying to drive, as well as what I'm asking of people, that they're doing it.
Yeah. I had somebody shadow me yesterday, and one of the comments was like, everybody seems to be so, in tune and connected, and I was like, because everyone works with each other. Everybody's constantly, either they rotate different responsibilities or they work together, but there's a cohesion there. And part of that is being present. And I remember hearing when I first got there, talks about previous people in that same role where they were always behind closed doors. And people notice these things, and it really kind of drives the culture, and that's an important piece.
Yeah, by far, I think presence is the biggest thing you can do as a leader.
Yeah.
And especially during crisis, right? When times are really not good, or if you've got a situation that you're dealing with, the pandemic was one of those examples, right? Being out there and walking the floors and being present, that was important to people because, was it a time when we were stressed? Absolutely. Was it a time when we were feared of getting sick? Absolutely. But if we're asking our own people to be there, we need to be there as well as leaders.
Yeah, agreed. It was really great. I'm glad we had opportunity to get some people to ask questions directly to you. But I'm going to go back to the rapid fire questions, right?
Okay.
One word to describe your time in Balad, Iraq.
Hot.
I had pegged. Lori and I were guessing what it would be. I had it pegged for intense.
It wasn't, but it was, it's a heat unlike, I always tell everybody the best way to give an example of is put your oven on 500. And then once it gets really, really hot, open the door and let the heat hit you in the face. And then you know just what heat is, right? It was hot, but there's two other words. One was resilient, right? My first deployment, because I was in Balad during both my deployments. First, I was there with the hospital. And I had to learn resiliency. I had to learn how to take care of myself because I actually got sick during that deployment because I wore myself down so far where I, got sick. But I was able to become resilient and overcome that. The second deployment was, I would consider it rewarding because it was the most rewarding, one of, if not the most rewarding experiences for me to be able to lead 900 soldiers in 43 different locations in Iraq. And be present, do battlefield circulation. And, and the other part of it was not lose a single soldier during that entire deployment.
That's awesome. Wow. That's great. Hard to go back to keep going to rapid fire when you leave nuggets like that. But coffee or tea to start the CEO's day?
I have coffee. I have 1 cup of coffee in the morning.
What brand?
Oh, different ones. We have a really nice coffee maker here. And I just found a coffee shop in Georgetown. No, it was actually Round Rock, Texas, and I bought the coffee. But I'm not a big Starbucks. I'll drink Starbucks, but I like the more mild coffee.
Yeah. I doubt I can paint you into a corner, but here's my attempt.
And a lot of Splenda in it, so it's always sweet. My wife, if anybody ever drinks my cup of coffee by accident, they'll be like, they'll have that look on it.
Sweet.
Yeah.
It's my kind of coffee too.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to paint you into a corner, but I doubt I will. Favorite campus to visit, Southeast or Pearland?
I'm like a parent. I don't play favorites.
I knew it.
I see us as one team.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said. Most essential trait for a healthcare leader in 2026.
It's got to be resilience.
Mm.
We've got to be able to get through these tough times and be resilient as leaders.
Okay. What's your go-to way to decompress?
I love to be outside working around the house.
Really?
Yeah. I give you an example. If there's a broken landscape light outside, I'm going to go out there and do it. My wife keeps saying we can pay somebody to do it. And I said, no, I'm going to go out and do it.
Wow.
It's just me. It's my break. My wife's learned this about me recently and I know this is rapid fire, but I got to share this as a leader. We as leaders, right, we spend so much time around people, right? I'm out, and some people may not believe this, but I'm somewhat of an introvert. So it really takes a lot of energy, right, for me to really be out and so forth. I've gotten easier over the time, but I used to be a really, I was an introvert, but I've gotten out of it. But so you spend so much time around people that sometimes you just need your alone time. And that's my alone time when I'm outside working on the yard or doing something outside. And if my wife say, you go out and, I'm gonna go out and do a couple of things, I end up doing like 20 things and I'll spend hours out there, but it's my way to decompress.
Mm. All right. My last one of the rapid fire is best career advice you ever received.
The best career advice is what I shared at ACHE. And that was from Lieutenant General Sanchez when he told me and sat with me at that McDonald's and he told me, don't ever send a soldier into combat unprepared, unequipped, or untrained, okay, to do the job. If you do that, that's an ultimate leadership failure. And so I've approached everything I've done from that time back in 2008 when we spent that time at the McDonald's. Ever since then, I've always approached everything. Even now, when I do programmatic development in our hospitals, we're going to add a new service or something. I always make sure that the staff is well equipped, well trained, and fully prepared to do the mission. If not, we don't do it. We don't go until I get all the green light for all three of those things.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. We're gonna conclude now, but there's a question I wanted to ask you, or ask of you. If someone may be watching this either right now or may come across this on YouTube or LinkedIn Live, and may need to hear or just hear something that they need to just get past that obstacle or whatever it is that they're going. If there's any piece of advice that you could give somebody who really wants to follow in your footsteps into the executive suite, what would you tell that person?
First, I tell them to be patient, right? It takes time. When you think and you look and you reflect in my career, right? I had an over 30-year career. Part of that was the first 3 years of my military career were in the National Guard. And then I spent just almost 27 and a half on active duty. My career, leading up to where I ended my career as running an Army hospital, it took that long, right, to really get there. But that's the way, the military, that's how we did, they groomed leaders, right? You did an assignment every 2 to 3 years. And then ultimately leave at that rank and to leave in that role. I left in a positive note. Right. But I always tell it, and I've talked to many people and I sit down because they come to me for advice. And I said, you got to be patient in your career. Right. You got to take your time. But there's three things that I will tell everybody as you go into a role. Right. Because as you go into a job, you need to make sure that as you approach that job, you grow in that role. Right. Because you want to take that job on. You want to grow in it. You really want to, first of all, you want to learn the role. That's the most important thing. Then you want to grow and mature in that role. And then the third thing is you want to master that role. And then once you've mastered it and you've built a good, solid team, then it's time to look for that next opportunity and looking for that next role that you want to take on. Because if you don't ever, now there's sometimes you get pulled from a role early. That just happens, right? But if you're the one in control, make sure that you do that, because you want to definitely leave that part of the organization or whatever you're leading in a much better place, and you want to be able to hand it off to somebody with a really great product. But really, it's important that you do that. Don't be too fast-paced to try and get to a certain level, right? I've heard people I've talked to some leaders that they say, well, by my mid to late 30s, I already want to be in a CEO role. That's possible, right? It is, right? And I go back and I reflect on my career. I took a step back when I left the military and went from running and being a CEO of a hospital to COO of a hospital. And at one point, I go back and I tell people, at one point I was the chief operating officer of the largest military hospital in this country, or, in part of the Department of Defense, a 450 bed hospital in San Antonio. And there were a lot of times, about 75% of the time I was there, I was kind of in that senior leadership role because my boss was triple hatted. So there was a lot of times when I was in the acting command role.
Understood.
So when you think of running an organization, level 1 trauma center and so forth, but I took a step back because I wanted to learn, the differences between military healthcare and private sector. And, that's a risk, right? It was, and some people say, well, you took a step back, but it was also the best advice I got from an executive recruiter. He said, you military guys always just want to jump and be in a, right up to that top, but sometimes you got to take a step back. But like really, you got to make sure that, you're really growing into those roles. And the other part of it too was, you've got great organizations to be a part of. You can be a part of NALHE, right? You can be a part of ACHE. I will tell everybody, do both. I've met so many that are saying, I'm only a part of NALHE. Well, why aren't you part of ACHE, right? I've done both. I've been part of both. They're both important to me. They both provide, a lot of value. But you've also got to, and I'll tell this to any young leader, is make sure that you take the time to invest in yourself. Right. Some people say, well, I've got to pay for these organizations. Yeah, but they're well worth it. I use the example of how many times, how often do you buy a cup of Starbucks, And so people say, well, I buy a cup of Starbucks every day. Yeah. The total that you'll spend on Starbucks is far more expensive than you will spend becoming a member of NALHE and ACHE. And you're going to get more value out of being a part of ACHE and NALHE than you will out of that. Now, Starbucks is probably going to be upset with me, but you're going to get just a lot of value out of it, right? You're going to get the networking. You're going to get the education. And education is so important. And that's the other thing I tell leaders is make sure you continue to educate yourself. Now you've got an undergraduate, you've got a master's degree. Some people want to go on and get a doctorate. That's fine. But if you've got an undergraduate, make sure that you're driving towards getting a master's degree, right? Because more than likely, you're not going to make it up to the executive level without a master's degree. It's usually, most of the time, it's a requirement that you have an MBA, MHA, one of those master's program degrees in order to be eligible for that role. So you've got to get yourself educated. But the other part of it is the continuing education piece, because there's so much that I learned just in my transition, right? So when I talked earlier about my transition from the military to the private sector, I used a lot of education sessions at ACHE to help me with the weaknesses that I had, those areas that I needed help on. I would find those sessions at Congress or at a chapter event and go to those sessions to learn from the leaders that were speaking, to help build myself up, both from from my professional skill set, but also my leadership skill set. Because, my mom was an educator. She was a teacher. And one of the best pieces of advice she gave me was she told me, don't ever forget to continue to educate yourself. Education is a continuous process.
Yeah. Noel, I know we're running out of time, but last minute question related to your statement earlier. What do you mean by the best way to predict your future is to create it? Jose wanted to know a little bit more.
Yeah, so this is a quote that's really become a part of my life. And I found it a few years ago, and I was writing a speech when I was taking on when I was selected as the chair-elect. I had to give a speech at the Council of Regents, and I said, give me, I went out there, what's the best quote for predicting your future? And that quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln is what popped up, and that is the best way to predict your future is to create it. And what that means is you have to create your future. You're the one that has to really find identify the things you want to do in your career, and find your passion and your purpose, and then find and develop that path for yourself and the roles you want to take. Yeah. The best example that I've shared was, and my wife is the one that reminded me about this, was in 1996. I was sitting at Brooke Army Medical Center. It was a Sunday afternoon. My wife was there for an OB appointment. It was a special appointment they made on a Sunday for her. We're sitting out. There was hardly anybody in the hospital. We were sitting on a bench, and she asked me flat out, what is it that you see yourself doing in the military? What roles do you want to do? And so I sat there and started walking through every single one of those, right? I want to do this role. I want to do this role. I want to be a battalion commander. I want to be a chief operating officer of within the military. I want to run an Army hospital. And then one of the things I said to her, I said, wouldn't it be great to come back here to this hospital, to Brooke Army Medical Center, to one be the chief operating officer? In 2010, or early 2010, I got notified that I was going to be the chief operating officer at Brooke Army Medical Center, coming out of my command in Germany.
That's amazing.
So you can predict it. You just got to, you got to sit down and actually write it out and know what you want to do. But first and foremost, know what your why is, know what your passions are. And, I had an opportunity to do a podcast with ACHE, and you'll hear it very soon, but I talk about that. And my passion first was healthcare. My second passion was serving others and serving our nation. And the third was leadership. And I've been able to really do all that through what that quote right there says, right? Is the best way to predict your future is to create it.
Yeah.
You are the best person to do that. And there's going to be a lot of people that are going to help you do that. But you also got to share that, what you want to do and the roles you want to take.
Yeah. Noel, thank you for that tidbit right before your upcoming podcast. You broke news.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for that. Thank you for all the questions and everybody who was watching. But Noel, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your generous, your guidance, your support, your sponsorship, your mentorship. It's really, really a pleasure to have this. This is everything I hoped it would be. And I'm really grateful. So
well, thank you. I appreciate, you giving me the opportunity to share just some tidbits. I hope that maybe there was somebody that walked away with something from this session that you and I just did.
That's my hope too. Excellent. Thank you. At this point now, I'm going to bring back Tom, and I'm going to thank everybody for joining. Tom, thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dave and Noel. That was inspiring. I'll just know that I certainly took away a bunch of tidbits. So you achieved your goal. So thank you again for that. And I'm hoping that all of you who are listening in, you also found today's conversation inspiring. Hopefully it challenged you, reminded you of the importance of coming together to learn from one another. If you enjoyed today's dialogue, we invite you to continue the conversation with us at the upcoming 2026 NALHE Leadership Summit. We're thrilled to officially announce the 2026 NALHE Leadership Summit. That's going to be taking place September 23rd through the 25th in the beautiful land of enchantment, Albuquerque, New Mexico. So that's exciting. I know we're all looking forward to it. It's a fabulous city. It's a great time to get together. The theme for this year's summit, Now, Next, NALHE, powered by people. The summit is already generating all kinds of anticipation, especially in today's healthcare environment, where strong visionary leadership matters more than ever. This experience is designed for all of you as leaders who are ready to navigate what's happening now while shaping the future on what comes next. The summit will be open to everyone. Registration will officially open later this month. To stay connected and to receive updates and make sure that you're in the know and up to date, I'd like to encourage you, 1, to follow NALHE on LinkedIn, 2, watch for updates in the NALHE newsletter, 3, look out for the NALHE text messages. And if you haven't yet signed up for those, please do that so they get the right information to you right away in breaking news. And then finally, and 4th, be sure to visit the NALHE website, nalhe.org. It's full of information that can be helpful to you in many ways, including, of course, all the information about the summit. With regard to the summit, we also want to highlight that the call for session presentations is now officially out, and all of you can play an important role in helping to create the summit experience. Session proposals, if you're interested in presenting at the summit and having a proposal considered, those are due on Friday, June 19th. And we are already getting submissions coming in. And again, this is how you can play an important role in creating that summit experience. If you're interested in presenting, again, submit that proposal in response to the flyer. You see that on the screen. now. If you have any questions about that, the process, what it involves, you can also reach out to info@mynalhe.org. So again, info@mynalhe.org. If you've been considering submitting, now's the time. This is it. This is your opportunity. Step forward, be inspired by Noel's comments and the encouragement to step forward. Your voice, your experience, and your work matter. And we'd love to see you as part of the 2026 Summit agenda. Thank you again for being here and listening in, for posing questions, for supporting NALHE, and for continuing to invest in leadership that moves our communities and our industry forward. We look forward to seeing you, and I personally look forward to seeing you all, as I will definitely be in Albuquerque, New Mexico in September. Again, thank you for being here this evening and joining. Good evening.